and I bid you farewell.
Welcome to Book Time with Ryan. I'm Ryan, and today I'm talking about the cultural lives of whales and dolphins. I'm wearing a hat from the New Bedford Whaling Museum and a shirt from the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and I'm still on Team Sperm Whale. Today, we're going to talk about this great book that I believe was first published in 2015. I really like it. It's not only about sperm whales, it's about other whales. It's also about dolphins. It's by Hal Whitehead and Luke Rendell. Hal Whitehead wrote the sperm whale book that I've already done a video on. Now, this book is a little more complex because it covers more species. I wrote some notes, but they're not going to be very helpful. The number one thing I want you to remember, well, not the number one thing, one thing I want you to remember is because I'm on Team Sperm Whale, I have to say this. Killer whales are kind of assholes. Killer whales are the assholes of the sea. They're the New York Yankees fans of the sea. And they can suck it. You know what? Because they're not whales. They're dolphins. So, take that, killer whales. Would I say that in front of a killer whale? No, probably not. If I was out of the water and not near the surf line, I would probably say it. But I don't want them beaching themselves to eat me, and I don't want to be eaten in the water with them. They are very smart, but they're kind of assholes. To each other, too. And that's, how do you know that? Because the name of this video is Xenophobic Killer Whales. And xenophobic is just not a nice word, right? Okay, so we'll talk about that later. Before that, I'm going to talk about a couple other books I'm going to read in the future. One of them is A Whale for the Killing by Farley Moet. One of the ships from the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society was named after this person, Farley Moet. Not sure if I'm saying the name right. This book proves two things. I haven't read it yet, but I know what it's about. And it proves two things. One, Canadians have guns, and sometimes they want to pretend like there are only guns in America, but Canadians have guns. Two, not all Canadians are nice. What happened in this book, which is a true story, a fin whale was trapped in a tidal pond in Canada, and instead of people trying to save the whale, locals came out and started shooting it for target practice. Huh? That's not cool, Canada. I will just say this, the Nashville Predators beat the Canucks last night. Why is that great? Because the Predators are my team, but also the Canucks logo has a killer whale on it. So it just seemed appropriate for today. The other book I got was Ahab's Return, The Last Voyage. I don't know what this is about. It's a horror book. This is the Ahab from Moby Dick, but this is Manhattan. And so I don't know what this book's going to be about. This is going to be, I'm going to read Moby Dick before I read this book. So this is further down the line. Although it was focusing on whales and dolphins, the four that we know the most about are humpback whales, sperm whales, killer whales, and bottlenose dolphins. That's where most of the research has been done to varying degrees. And that's kind of what they focused on. But there were also other whales, longfin, shortfin, pilot whales, other kinds of dolphins, not porpoises, interestingly enough. Apparently porpoises are not social, and maybe they're the dumb ones. Also, they didn't really go into, they kind of went into pinnipeds, seals and sea lions, and they also went into manatees and dugongs. I'm not sure if I say that right either. There are so many words that I've read but have not really heard used recently. And I'm going to tell you one of the words because I'm going to use it, and I may use it the wrong way the entire time. Matrilineal or matrilineal. It is basically the line is through the mother, the matriarch. But I've only read it, so I don't know if it's matrilineal or matrilineal. I'm probably going to say matrilineal, but I may flip-flop. The main picture of this video is taken from the graphic from Free Willy. And I made the thumbnail image before I got to the chapter that talks about Willy, who is actually Kiko the killer whale. And it was a fairly depressing story about Kiko, or the Willy from Free Willy. If you haven't seen Free Willy, check it out. If you have, and you're of my age group, you realize that Free Willy opened up a number of inappropriate middle school kid jokes while we were in school. We're going to talk about xenophobic killer whales. I'm going to talk about codas and sperm whales. Now, a lot of the sperm whale stuff I've talked about in my last sperm whale video, but I'll touch on some of that stuff. We'll talk about bottlenose dolphins using sponges to fish. And we'll talk about humpback whale songs. I'm probably going to cut that out. All right, number 1, xenophobic whales. Xenophobic killer whales, the assholes of the sea. Why are they assholes? All right, so when we think about killer whales, I think we all think of the same thing. It's a black whale with white patterns. They're ferocious. They hunt in packs like wolves. They're kind of the wolves of the sea. They are the apex predator. They are the top predator. They feed on top predators. We think of killer whales in a certain way. As a layman, we don't really differentiate between different kinds of killer whales, right? They all look the same, basically. The males have higher dorsal fins. They're really tall. Females have shorter dorsal fins that are pointy. The thing about killer whales is they all stay together. So they will mate between groups. What you'll see in some whales, sperm whales, is the females and young males will stay together, but the aging males go off. Eventually they return to reproduce, to mate, but they don't hang out in the pod, the group. But killer whales do. So why are they xenophobic? We think of killer whales as being all the same thing, but there's actually little groups of them that do certain things. They eat certain things. They might eat Chinook salmon. They might eat marine mammals, such as seals or sea lions. Some may go after whales around the Antarctic. There are transient killer whale pods that move around looking for marine mammals. And there are resident killer whale pods that stay in the same area and eat salmon. And those whale pods are different sizes. The actual whales in them tend to be different average sizes, and they don't like each other. There's a story in the book about a scientist who was observing whales, and I think it was in a bay. It was in some kind of body of water, obviously. And this was, I believe, off of Vancouver. Yeah, Vancouver, the same place that had a hockey team that just lost to the Nashville Predators last night. You're right. The scientists observed a number of the resident killer whales, the killer whales that are kind of territorial, that's their area, spring off to another part of the bay. What they were going after were a group of 3 transient killer whales that had kind of stumbled in their territory. And they went after them. They bit them. They tried to hit them. The transient killer whales were like, well, we're getting out of here. We don't want to be attacked by this group of 20 or 30 resident killer whales that are kind of protecting their turf. So they chased them for a while, bloodied them up, nipped at them. And eventually they got to a point where the transient killer whales kept going, kept fleeing, and the resident killer whales stopped. And they just said, like, okay, this is our spot. What they found is when there are pods of resident and transient killer whales, they will try to avoid each other. Typically, the transient killer whales, if they detect the resident killer whales, they'll either change directions, they'll veer off, they'll turn around, they'll slow down. Also, the transient killer whales are not as vocal. They're hunting marine mammals, which have ears and can hear. So they don't want to make a lot of their killer whale whistles and sounds because the marine mammals will be able to detect their presence and take evasive action. With the resident killer whales that are eating salmon, they're very vocal. So what you'll see is the transient killer whales are pretty silent during these interactions, and the resident killer whales are very vocal. They're xenophobic because they don't mix with the other groups of killer whales. And there are killer whales that favor, I've talked about it for the north part, but there are also ones that attack, I believe, minke whales in the Antarctic. They'll also go after marine mammals by beaching themselves and pulling pups or stray seals from the surf, and they'll also go after penguins. These groups of killer whales don't interact with other groups. Now, there's larger communities of these killer whales, and different pods, different groups will interact and mate between those groups within the communities. But the communities of these killer whales won't. They don't like each other. So they're xenophobic, and I stand by that. That was the xenophobic was used in the book to describe the actions of killer whales. So I'm going to use that too, and it's also clickbait. So Willie, I did my xenophobic picture, my xenophobic killer whale picture for my thumbnail based off of Free Willy, the movie. And then I got to a chapter that mentions Kiko, who is the real whale that played Willie. Free Willy is about a killer whale that is captured. It's in captivity. This kid named Jesse, who's kind of a troubled youth. He's a delinquent. He's a juvenile delinquent. He's trying to work off some time he owes. He connects with Willie. He realizes that Willie wants to join his family in the wild. He's in distress. Jesse decides that they're going to save Willie. And that's what they do. Basically, they use some Native American chant, and Willie jumps over breakers and is free. The real story is Willie was captured, was caught off of Iceland when he was, I believe Kiko's a he, when Kiko was around 2. And Kiko spent most of the rest of its life in captivity. Kiko went to Canada and was in a facility in Canada, and then found his way to Mexico, and that's where Kiko was cast for the role of Willie. After Free Willy came out, and they realized that Kiko was it's a social animal, living alone, there was this push to free Willie, free Kiko. A lot of money was raised. Some of the money was from, I think, Warner Brothers, whichever company produced Free Willy. And they raised enough money to reintroduce Kiko to the wild. Eventually, they moved Kiko I think they tried to move Kiko to Iceland and then to Norway. They actually found a group of killer whales and tried to get Kiko involved with the killer whales. And Kiko was uncomfortable. The problem was Kiko did not develop these social habits as a younger killer whale, and had never developed them and wouldn't develop them. So there were things that these killer whales, the wild killer whales, did that is a typical way of being social that scared Kiko. So eventually Kiko lived out his days in a fjord in Norway alone, just couldn't get acclimated with the wild killer whales. Eventually Kiko died alone of pneumonia. So, sad ending. The reintroduction of Kiko to the wild was not successful. And a lot of that's because Kiko didn't have the time with other wild killer whales when Kiko was younger to develop the behaviors that Kiko needed to have to survive in the wild as part of a social unit. The book also talks about sperm whales. Now, there's not a whole lot of new stuff in here about sperm whales, but I'll just kind of rehash what I've learned about sperm whales from Hal Whitehead's other book on sperm whales, what I've learned since really getting into it, some of what I've read in this book. Sperm whales are very social animals. It's matrilineal, so the females stay together, the young males stay together with their mothers. It's hard to study sperm whales because they spend much of their life deep underwater. They'll go down for 45 minutes and they'll be up for 8 minutes to get a breath, and then they'll go back down. Most of the research follows the females because the males, once they grow up, they go off in either bachelor groups or sometimes alone to higher latitudes, the colder areas, except to come back to mate. So it's hard to follow them around. It's also hard to follow because they go into areas that humans have very hard time getting into. They're also a nervous kind of whale. They develop different kinds of patterns for their vocalizations called codas, and those codas can be used to identify the groups of sperm whales. There are larger groups in the Pacific, and some of the thought is that maybe because grouping helps protect them, and there is some threat of predation in the Pacific. while in the Atlantic, there are smaller groups, and some of the thought that maybe because they don't have that relationship with killer whales, they don't flee or they don't immediately gather in what's called like a wagon wheel pattern or a rosette to protect themselves. There's different codas, society, this cultural life is passed through the group. They will nurse each other's young. They will babysit calves towards the surface because calves can't dive as long or as deep. Sperm whales seem to be altruistic too. There are examples of sperm whales forming a rosette or wagon wheel pattern for protection. And as one whale is separated, this is by killer whales, one whale will leave and guide that whale back into the formation at great risk to the whale that is going back to kind of rescue its family member. It's amazing stuff. It also talks about bottlenose dolphins, and bottlenose dolphins are very curious, very common all over the world. But one of the examples they talk about behavior that's cultural is using sponges to fish. This is in Shark Bay, Australia. I think it's Australia, not New Zealand. Go in and look for fish, forage for fish in some areas that may be dangerous. Maybe dangerous with poisonous fish or sea snakes. What they'll use are sponges, naturally occurring sponges in the ocean that they'll stick on their noses so they can forage without the risk of being bitten or stabbed or scraping their noses. It's a cultural experience because not all of them do that. Not all families will do that. The other group is humpback whales. And I think that's actually how the book started off. It talks about humpback whales. And the big thing with humpback whales that they discuss is the songs of humpback whales. Humpback whales have, really, when you think about the vocalization of whales, you're probably thinking of humpback whales because those are the most common. The song that I started out this video with was actually referenced in the book, and the background music is humpback whale vocalizations. They have patterns and songs that they will sing, and those songs will slowly evolve. And sometimes there's a revolution in the song. Some new song comes out like it's a CD. A whale will create a new song and it catches on. Other whales really like it. They start using it too, and it'll spread in a season. They can also see when there are changes in the songs, those changes are adopted by other whales in the community. So it's not just that they've come up with something, but they're also that song is evolving and the song is learned by other members of the community, and that's part of culture. This book was very interesting because it also had other stories about non-cetaceans like baboons. There was an example of a baboon group in Kenya called the Forest Troop. They were being studied by a primatologist, and I think they were primatologists in Kenya. There was a resort in the area. Forest Troop lived a couple miles maybe away from the resort in a tree, in a few trees. There's also the Garbage Troop, which was a group of baboons that hung out near the dump. And with an increase in tourism, the dump expanded. Some of the Forest Troop males went to the dump to find food, and they would just eat almost exclusively from the dump. To do that, they had to be aggressive, or they would be, fought by the garbage dump troop. So only the most aggressive males from the Forest Troop successfully fed from the dump. Eventually they got bovine tuberculosis from infected meat, and the dump troop essentially was wiped out, and all of these aggressive males, basically all the aggressive males from the Forest Troop were wiped out too. They all died of bovine tuberculosis. So what was left were passive males that couldn't compete. The scientists found that the group of baboons were more passive as a family. The stronger baboons, the higher level ones, weren't fighting the lower level ones, weren't bullying. The females were grooming more of the males. And 7 years later, the scientists came back thinking that everyone that was involved with this group had died, that was passive and had probably switched back to its original kind of aggressive or more typical look. But what had happened was the baboons that took over, that inherited this group, also continued to be passive. They figured that this behavior was a cultural behavior, that this passive approach to culture was passed on culturally instead of genetically. And that's where a lot of this comes down. It comes down to what can you say is genetic and what can you say is cultural. And Hal and Luke would say, I believe, that culture is as important and sometimes pushes the genetic evolution. An example being humans and lactose intolerance. I'm lactose intolerant. Most of us are, because once you're weaned, there's really no reason for your body to produce lactase. It's a waste, and your body really tapers back all the lactase production, which is the enzyme used to process lactose. You drink milk and your tummy doesn't feel good because you don't have the enzymes that you would need that you had when you were a baby to process the milk. There are some Scandinavian cultures that started domesticating cows and were involved in dairy production, and they developed more tolerance. So the behavior, the cultural, social behavior of these humans really pushed them and their bodies to be able to process milk. So that's their culture pushing genetics versus, changing your genes, changing the way you behave. So I thought that was very interesting. The hard thing for scientists are whales live in an environment that we're not suited for. They spend most of their lives in areas we can't see. And to even try to see them is difficult. You're battling the elements, you're battling weather, you're battling resources. You're also battling the reality that we can't readily move from air to water in a way that you can seamlessly follow sea life, especially whales. So it's very hard to do the kind of observation that would make a lot of what we know about whales more complete. The other thing is, you can't take a sperm whale or a humpback whale, and you can't take many whales, with the exception of probably belugas and killer whales, into captivity. And even when you do, training them alters the way that they'll behave. So you're not getting a really great experiment on how they would act in the wild. And some scientists want that. I have found from reading this book that it seems like our authors have issues with anthropologists. And I think they should, based on what I read. It's very easy as humans for us to focus on humans and see everything else through a lens of what is this compared to humanity. And that's not a fair way to do that. If we were looking at humans through the lens of a whale, like everything that they do, we're not suited to do naturally. And even with technology, we're still not the best at doing. I really enjoy learning about whales. When you think about whales, this is what we need to remember, right? We're talking about evolution. The predecessors to mammals came out of the water, developed lungs to breathe, developed live birth, caring for their young, and eventually us. Whales did the same kind of thing, and then they went back into the water and developed ways to survive there. And that is amazing stuff. This is like a back and forth. They were filling up probably a niche. It's something that I just find surprising. I think when we're thinking about whales and animals, you see it through the now. Like, where are we right now? And this is what this animal is. This is what this animal will always be. When you look at it through a continuum, who knows if manatees are headed in the direction that whales are, and they're just at an earlier phase, closer to the coast, with less of the adaptations for open ocean survival. Who knows if seals and sea lions are just further back in going back to the water, and they're still having their live birth on land and feeding. Because then you'll see some stuff like elephant seals where they'll sleep underwater. They spend more time at sea than a lot of other species. There are some chapters in here that will talk about what whales don't do, and do they really need to do it? Like, does a whale need a car? No. The other thing that I find interesting is think about what we know, right? Like I am recording this on an iPhone. After I record this on the iPhone, I'm going to airdrop it to my computer, and then I'm going to upload it. And I'm going to edit some stuff. And then I'm going to post it. I don't know how to make anything from the tools that I'm using. I don't know how to create any of these tools. I can't create an iPhone. I can't create the parts of the iPhone. I have no idea how to create plastic or glass or all the parts that make this phone work. I have no idea how I would create a Wi-Fi network, how I can airdrop the video to my computer, how my computer works, I would never be able to build a computer. And I'm not like talking about like, hey, I'm a tech nerd and I'm going to build my own processor. I can't build the basic materials to build the pieces of a computer to build a computer. I can't do that. I have to look up how to, because I don't want to blow up my car or shock myself. I look up how to connect my battery on my car to another car if I'm jumping it. There are so many things that we do because it's recorded somewhere, it's in a book, or it's already been done for us by the millions and millions of other humans, the billions of humans before us. And we just benefit from that. Every other animal can't do that. They will develop cultural lives. They will pass things on socially, but they don't record it. And a lot of what we experience now as humans is because somebody recorded it, somebody else has done it, and we know our little parts, but could we do it together? It's just amazing when you think about, oh, these whales or these dolphins don't measure up to humans, but really, how would you measure up without somebody else giving you your IKEA bookshelf or providing you with the gasoline to put in your car? There's just so much specialization and evolution of what we use that it's very easy to kind of get cocky about that and think about all these other animals that don't do that stuff. Now, like, I'm a human. I'm on Team Human too, right? Team people. But if I was having to navigate from the Bahamas to Greenland by myself, I would die. I would die pretty early on because I have no idea how to do that. And I've taken navigation courses, celestial navigation courses that were developed by other humans over hundreds of years. I would never know how to do that, and yet a whale can. So through that lens, I have not adapted well. The thing is, I don't need to know how to do that. I think there are so many more humans because we have this support of technology and of written history, and we've recorded and passed on all this knowledge, and that's why we can support the number of humans on the earth that we do, because we've created medicines for diseases and how to heat your food and how to freeze your food, how to survive the winter, how to get from place to place quickly. And there are just other animals that haven't done that or don't have a need to do that. Or if they did, what would that look like? And I don't know if we're in a place where we could see it through another lens that isn't really biased by our experiences as humans. So I really enjoyed this book. I recommend it. Luke is on Twitter. He's very responsive. Eventually I will read this book, which will change my opinion of Canadians. Except for Canucks, the hockey team. I already had a poor opinion of them and a number of other teams. And then at some point I'll read this. This is probably a little more tangential to this talk of whales. So that is it. I hope you enjoy this. I know that this is kind of high level stuff that may not make sense, may not be interesting. There's a lot to digest from this book, and it's very hard without good notes to discuss it in a way that makes sense or feels like a complete thought. So, thank you for joining me today. If you're in New Bedford, check out the New Bedford Whaling Museum. Go Team Sperm Whales, and screw you, killer whales. You xenophobic douchebags.